A very good morning, students. I, Dr. Sanjana Sharma, welcome you to the class of paper second. And student, as you know, we are analyzing the novel Oliver Twist by famous novelist Charles Dickens. In our last class, we discussed that as Oliver is kept at the workhouse for most of the first year of his life, the workhouse, however, does not have the suitable facilities for the care of an infant, and Oliver is transferred to a privately run house for juveniles. And students, this place is managed by Mrs. Mann, who pockets most of the allowance money she is paid for the care of each child. The children, in turn, are uncared for and hungry. Many die from this system of neglect, but the few investigations that are made by the government board reveal only death by natural causes or accident. So, students, we see that in this heartless environment, Oliver grows to be a fragile and hungry 9-year-old. On his birthday, he and two companions are beaten and locked in the cellar as punishment for being hungry. On this day, Mr. Bumble, the parish beadle, arrives at Mrs. Mann's house. This proprietress is careful to release Oliver and his companion from the cellar before she admits Mr. Bumble. Students, one day, Oliver is summoned before the board that controls and regulates parish workhouse policies. The intimidated child appears in front of a group of severe men who question and instruct him on his behavior. They explain that he is to be educated and learn a useful trade. The next morning, he will begin his new job of picking oakum. Oliver settles into this new life of deprivation and hardship. All the boys in the workhouse are constantly hungry. Their meager diet on thin gruel, an occasional onion, and some bread is insufficient for growing boys. After several months of this, one of the beggar boy decides to do something. He declares he is so hungry that he will eat one of his smaller companion. After a hasty discussion, the other boys draw lots to decide who should ask for more food. The unpleasant task falls to Oliver. Students, that evening at supper, when gruel is being dished out, Oliver asks for more. The simple request becomes an incident. Mr. Bumble is summoned and later reports the occurrence to the board. As a result of his impudence, Oliver is put into confinement. Immediately, the board posts a notice in the neighborhood offering 5 pounds to any person who will take the ungrateful child as an apprentice. Meanwhile, the board members are so distraught by the incident that one of them ventures to predict that such an insolent upstart as Oliver will no doubt come to a violent end. Students, in the next chapter, we see that as punishment for asking for more food, Oliver is put in solitary confinement for 1 week. During the long days, he cries, and at night, he huddles in a corner, frightened and trembling. His only outings consist of being flogged before the other boys at supper time and of being exhibited at prayers as an example of bad behavior to the others. One day, Mr. Gamfield, a chimney sweep, is leading his donkey cart past the workhouse. Gamfield is worried about some of 5 pounds which he needs for rent. As he walks along and thinks he is occupied with beating his donkey, suddenly he notices the posted bill advertising Oliver's services as an apprentice. Gamfield decides he needs just such an apprentice. On his way to inquire, he is met by Mr. Limpkins, one of the members of the parish board. Shortly, he is taken before the other members and they negotiate on the amount of the reward offered for Oliver. A price of just over £3 is finally agreed on. Mr. Bumble is sent to retrieve Oliver from his imprisonment and to clean him up. When Oliver appears before two magistrates who must approve the final papers for his apprenticeship, he is upset by the proceedings and terrified by the appearance of Mr. Gamfield. One of the magistrates is very old and half blind. He is about to sign the documents when he happens to observe the frightened look on Oliver's face. Instead of signing the papers, the old gentleman questions Oliver on his feelings about the apprenticeship. Oliver, in desperation, pleads with the magistrate to do anything with him rather than send him away with the chimney sweep. The old man, who is kind-hearted, considers Oliver's words and decides not to approve the apprenticeship. Oliver is sent back to the workhouse on magistrate's order. The members of the board are shocked by the decision and appalled at Oliver's continued ingratitude. They predict an even more horrible future for him and arrange to have a new notice posted about the child's availability. And student, what happens next is that the members of the board consult about the possibility of sending Oliver to sea abroad a trading ship. They send Mr. Bumble to make inquiries. On his return, Mr. Bumble encounters Mr. Sowerberry, the parish undertaker. As they have a friendly talk about the profits of the undertaker's business, Mr. Bumble asks if Sowerberry knows of anyone looking for an apprentice. The undertaker finally decides to take Oliver for himself. Again that evening, Oliver is led before the board to be informed of his new position. This time, he displays no emotion and remains silent. The gentleman of the board assumes as he is becoming a hardened young rascal when actually his youthful spirit is being beaten out of him by repeated abuse. Mr. Bumble takes Oliver to his new employer. On the way, Oliver pleads for some kindness and understanding. Even the hardened Bumble is temporarily moved by child's pleas. When they arrive at the undertaker's establishment, Oliver is inspected by Mr. and Mrs. Sowerberry. The lady of the house is not pleased with the prospect of having to feed and clothe Oliver. Orphans, she says, always cost more to keep than they are worth. Then she sends him downstairs to be fed by the kitchen girl, Charlotte. Mrs. Sowerberry orders that he be given the table scraps that they were saving for their dog trip. Oliver, hungry as usual, not used to eating meat, devours the mess appreciatively. When he is finished, Mrs. Sowerberry leads him upstairs to show him where he will sleep. His bed is under a counter among the coffins. Students, as we see in his new life, Oliver does not seem to be much better off than he was in the workhouse. Here, among unfriendly strangers, he is to make his home. His surroundings are dark and dismal. His employer's wife is a very bad lady. The kitchen girl is described as slatternly. Even Mr. Sowerberry has a face that is not naturally intended to wear a smiling aspect. The man's only warmth appears to be in connection with his business, which he treats with a light heart. So, students, here our today's class comes to an end. We will continue with the discussion on the novel in our next class as well. Thank you very much.